Welcome everyone to theScore Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at theScore, and today's episode is presented by Subway, who now deliver so you can get back to the game. On today's show, we're going to get you ready for Week 6. We're going to reassess where we stand with several teams and their fantasy outlooks moving forward here. So let's bring on today's guest to help us out with all of that. It's Eric Moody of fantasydata.com, of The Athletic as well. You can find his stuff on both sites. Eric, thanks for joining me today. How you doing, man?
No, things are going well, Justin. I do appreciate the invite to the podcast. I was looking forward to this all week. So things are going really well here in Dallas, Fort Worth. We're in the thick of NFL season. Weather is starting to cool down as well. I think we go from really one extreme. It's really hot or it gets really cold. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We actually have a fall this year. But the wife and the kiddos, are doing well. But how are things in your world?
Things are great. And I was going to mention, both of us are in the top 20 in Fantasy Pro's Most Accurate Expert competition. So that's a perfect start to the season, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to continue something that we started last week. On last week's show, I put it out on Twitter. I asked everybody what their biggest fantasy question was after the first month. And the response was absolutely overwhelming. So we decided to do it again this week. We got a lot of good ones, a lot. But similar to last week, there was one question or a version of one question that just kept coming up over and over. So that's the one that I picked. And I'm going to read a bunch of those that came in and we can discuss how we hopefully can help the listeners out here. I will say though, before we get to that one, at Bengal Fan Canada, they had the funniest question that I got. It was, who is OJ Howard? I thought that was a very funny way to word it. I actually laughed out loud. I mean, sadly, OJ Howard is a guy that you can drop from your fantasy team now. Phenomenal guy to have at a baseball game with you. He caught a baseball barehanded at the Rays game last night, but in fantasy, the Bucks aren't using him as much as we hope this year. So you can sadly let him go if there's another option out there that you could grab. But the main questions that came in all revolved around the Browns offense here. So let me read a couple of them and then we can get to it. At Rambo Riggs asks, fire sale on Browns assets not named Chubb? At FDMNFL wants to know, what do we do with OBJ? At Texas Tech Tim, is there any hope for Baker Mayfield? I'm in a 2 QB league. He's killing me. At Joey Knish, does Baker Mayfield and the offensive line woes make Odell a must sell? He's currently wide receiver 37 in PPR. At Eagles Finn 80, is it time to move on from OBJ? And the last one here, at GXRNV, does OBJ equal Corey Davis based on quarterback play? So Eric, a lot of strong takes there. A lot of people just genuinely concerned about this Browns offense, specifically the passing game. What do you think we should expect from OBJ, from Mayfield, from Jarvis Landry, and the rest of the guys in this offense like Nick Chubb for the rest of the season?
Yeah, and you're right. Those are some very, very strong takes. So many people, many people didn't expect the Browns to enter Week 6.
They're upset. It's understandable. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They're 2-3. They've gotten blown out in 2 out of their 3 losses. I do expect the offense to turn around. It really all comes down to the coaching staff. You've got Freddie Kitchens calling plays. He's the head coach. He's the leader of men, so to speak, amongst this group. He's got to be the catalyst for change. So Baker Mayfield, he's obviously struggling. That's probably like an understatement to some of those with Baker on their fantasy teams. But, he's average, negative fantasy points over expectations so far this season. Mayfield's a QB 28. He's averaging less than 10 fantasy points per game. He also has a true passer rating of 76.2. And this is one of the advanced metrics available in fantasy data. It does factor out unpressured throwaways and drop passes. He's also struggling to throw the ball deep. So it's not really surprising to see, Jarvis Landry leading the team in receiving yards. It's ironic that he almost has nearly as many air yards as Odell Beckham at this point. Landry isn't droppable and Mayfield isn't droppable either. But, Mayfield's not someone that you want to rush to insert into your fantasy lineup anytime soon. So my recommendation with him is really to take more of a wait and see approach. And it all comes down to the format that you're participating in. So Kitchens, should lean heavily on Nick Chubb. as a runner, as a receiver out of the backfield. I'm like, they're giving Chubb nearly 23 opportunities a game and a little bit over, 1 fantasy point per rushing attempt is what he's averaging and nearly 5 fantasy points per target. And he's playing about 75% of the offensive snaps. So it's an opportunity to get him on the field even more. And he does also have, when you look at his rushing and receiving fantasy points over expectation, he's positive as well. And he's someone that they can really lean heavily on. I know they'll have Kareem Hunt coming back to the fold here shortly to kind of give him a little bit of a reprieve. But I think the most important thing for the Browns right now is obviously to get some victories and some wins. Now, Odell Beckham, very, very, very... he's had a very high average draft position. I know he's clearly disappointed his owners at this point. He's one player that I would hold. Landry is more of a wide receiver 3. He's someone you may want to consider selling high on. But as far as Beckham, with him, I look at his statistical body of work. And I know all those fantasy owners out there are getting peltered with all sorts of crazy trade offers. So don't take any of them. Hold, sit tight. You look at Beckham, he's averaged nearly 93 receiving yards and 21 PPR fantasy points per game from 2014, his rookie year, to 2018. Obviously, that doesn't take into account 2019, but hey, there's still time for him to get it together and to produce. But really the best thing that this Browns coaching staff could do, and it can also help Baker as well, is to let's get some completions going OBJ's way. Let him go to work, for the team, Baker, and most importantly, fantasy owners with his yards after the catch ability.
Well, and like you said, they just got to get some wins, and it could be tough this week. They're on a short week. They got beat down in that Monday Nighter. Now they're going to get up against the Seahawks, who are a legitimately good team. I'm not worried about Chubb. I agree with you there. He's been producing. Maybe not as many scoring opportunities as we hoped or we'd like to see, but he has been producing. The concern I do have is Baker, and the Seahawks aren't the worst matchup. I mean, they haven't been generating a ton of pressure, and that's really been the biggest problem, right, for Baker and that offense is the offensive line hasn't been able to protect him, hasn't been able to give him any time to throw. So maybe in this one with that Seahawks front, if they're not getting as much pressure, maybe Baker will have some time. So I think he's sort of a middle-of-the-road starter this week. Didn't have a chance at all against the 49ers last week like we saw. Then they have a bye in week 7. And then after that, they come off with a few tough games for this passing attack. The Patriots, the Broncos, and the Bills. At least 2 of those are really tough matchups with the Bills and the Patriots. The Broncos game is in Denver, so that makes it a little bit harder. But the reason you want these guys on your team, and I'm going to take a slightly different approach than you did. The reason I think you want them on your team is from week 12 on. And it's schedule based because at that point in the year, they get Miami, they get Pittsburgh, they get Cincinnati, Arizona, and Baltimore. And specifically week 14 and 15, the start of the fantasy playoffs there, they get the Bengals and the Cardinals in those 2 matchups. So if you think you're going to make the playoffs, you want Browns in your lineup. Definitely Chubb, who can run wild on those teams, but also the guys in this passing game. You're going to want to have them on your team at that point in the year. Now, it's going to require you to survive the middle of the season, and hopefully you're going to be able to do that. I know if you invested in Beckham, at least in the first round, he probably had to get him maybe in the early second. It's going to be tough to get through, but if you can hold these guys through this point and you can get to that final stretch of the season, I think they're going to help a lot of people win fantasy matchups at that point in the year.
That's a good point. No, I agree. I'm like, and by that time, they should have things under control.
You would hope,
and trending
right?
in the right direction, right?
Maybe Todd Monk and the offensive coordinator will be calling plays by that point. Who knows?
Yeah, good point.
That's all for the video version of today's podcast. Big thanks to everybody for watching. Big thanks to everybody for providing the questions today. Appreciate all of you. If you want to hear the rest of the Week 6 preview pod with Eric and I, you can find it on the theScore app. It's the audio version. You can also find it on any podcast platform that you're using. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.
Said leave on time, my baby said leave on time.